Welcome back, everyone. If you have been with us through the series, we've been exploring what happens when the nervous system starts speaking louder than the mind can explain, especially during seasons like perimenopause, when the tools that used to work don't always work the same anymore. And tonight, we're talking about something that can feel incredibly personal once you start seeing it because sometimes what you're carrying didn't begin with you. Sometimes the anxiety, the overwhelm, the people pleasing, the emotional reactivity, even chronic survival mode, even the undiagnosed neurodivergence didn't start in your lifetime. Tonight, we're talking about the hereditary and ancestral layer, the genetics of neurodivergence, the inheritance of stress, and repeated family patterns, and what it really means to break cycles instead of just surviving inside of them. Because for many women, especially in midlife, this becomes a season where the pattern finally becomes visible. And once you see it, you can start changing it. Last week, we talked about spiraling, what's happening in the brain and the nervous system when your thoughts begin looping, emotions intensify, and your ability to regulate feels harder to access. We talked about the amygdala going online and the prefrontal cortex, I can't speak tonight, sorry, the prefrontal cortex going offline. And while simply telling yourself to calm down usually doesn't work in those moments, we covered things like grounding tools, body-based regulation, naming the state you're in, and learning the difference between spiraling, shutdown, and burnout. And tonight builds on that because sometimes the intensity of what you're feeling in the present moment is connected to something older than the present moment. Sometimes the nervous system is reacting from layers it learned long before you understood what was happening. So let's start with the science. ADHD and autism are among the most heritable neurodevelopmental conditions we know of, meaning genetics play a significant role. If someone says, my child was diagnosed with ADHD, and while you're doing your research or talking to doctors, you realize, oh my God, this describes me too. It's so incredibly common. Many women first discover their own neurodivergence while trying to understand their child. Suddenly, lifelong experiences start making sense. Why routines mattered so much, why noise felt overwhelming, why emotional regulation felt harder, and why masking became second nature. Why exhaustion followed them everywhere, why they always felt like they were working harder than everyone else to function normally. And then perimenopause often becomes the season where all the that they held, coping systems that held it together began to wobble. Heather, I'd love to have your thoughts here because I know so many women have that moment of recognizing themselves through someone they love.
Yeah, absolutely. So there was a study done that shows that 70 to 80% of people who are diagnosed with some sort of neurodivergence, especially ADHD and some forms of autism, they inherited it from their family. And there's some other studies that show that it appears to skip a generation, but that's not necessarily true because a lot of the people that it skipped were described as people who were dramatic or nervous, or they were super smart but very difficult to deal with, right? So they most likely had the same traits, they just weren't officially diagnosed. So I don't necessarily think that it skips a generation. I think that a lot of it is inherited. And there's been studies, even with people who have ancestors that went through the Holocaust, right? They went through a supremely traumatic experience and it changes your nervous system. So you're going to adapt through the DNA and through the epigenetics, which I want to talk about in a bit, the same kind of nervous system that was developed to deal with those high stress environment and situations that it's going to pass along in the family. So now, not only are you neurodivergent, you're eventually going to go through menopause, which I'll touch on a little bit later as well. But now you have you already have a nervous system when you're born that is equipped to deal with environmental, situational, stressful situations that maybe aren't necessarily, relevant to your life. So you have to learn how to cope and deal with that. And then you bring the masking and all of that stuff on top of that. So it
Hmm.
really does change. I mean, we talked about this in one of the previous episodes about how masking and coping and finding ways to deal with these divergences, these colorful, things that we go through that don't, continue to work through menopause. So there is a lot of, and this is just the scientific part of it because it goes through all the things, right? But there is, some of it that is, you can't help it. You can deal with it, you can learn to manage it, you can heal that and change it, but what you're starting with, the hand of cards that you're starting with is already, stacked a certain way that you have to learn how to work through.
Absolutely. I loved how you named how it didn't really skip the generations. Many women, they labeled them as, brilliant but hard to manage, too emotional or high strung or, scatterbrained or whatever. Um, like many women were forced to cope through perfectionism and overfunctioning and caretaking or even like silence. They didn't use their voice, and all of that is masking. And
Mhm.
so they just got really good at pretending to be something that they truly were not. So you're right. It wasn't that it was not inherited. It was just that they knew how to hide it. And even a little bit more so back then, it wasn't really talked about too much. It was very hush hush, like something was wrong with you. You have a mental illness, you have, you're just defective of sorts. So I don't believe that, which is simply not true, by the way. But it doesn't skip generations. It's just that certain women, men too, learn how to, hide inside of survival mode. And then that realization alone can bring up grief. When you finally learn to drop those masks, or if you are entering perimenopause and they drop for you. But some of us, I know I did, you grieve that part of you, because I remember looking in the mirror going, who the hell is this woman? And I've never fully met her. I've always known a version of me that was masking in some way. But it can also bring compassion too. Of what not to do, and this goes back to, this ties in with the ancestral layer, of chain breaking and stuff, which I'll touch on a little bit later. The compassion part leads to how you can show up differently for not only the women of your past, but the women in your present, or men too. I'm sorry, I keep talking about women, but the people in your life now. And then it speaks to the future generations as well. Like, what it is, to how to move differently and how to show up differently. What you didn't, the support and the care that you did not receive, what you experienced, you then can lead in a way that you are offering those things.
Yeah.
And you suddenly understand this whole, like, all the people in your past that have experienced this, you suddenly understand them, like, with a whole new lens. Let's go a layer deeper here, and let's talk the epigenetics, right? The inheritance of stress. Epigenetics studies how life experience can affect how genes are expressed, right? So not necessarily changing the DNA itself, but influencing how the system responds. Think of it like kind of like a dimmer switch. That's how it makes sense in my mind. Stress can like turn certain responses up, and then safety can help turn them down a little bit. And research suggests that trauma, chronic fear, instability, abuse, violence, poverty, prolonged stress, all of that can shape stress responses across generations.
Mhm.
Even they've recent studies have shown, they've are now proven that can be carried through the womb, which is how it gets passed down to us. Whatever your mother is experiencing while she's pregnant with you, not all of it per se, but it can shape how you deal with stress, how you deal with anxiety, how you deal with all these things that you will experience in your life. It can influence that. Um, if your mother and grandmother kind of lived in a constant survival mode, their bodies adapted to that environment of sorts. And some of those adaptations echoed forward, like hypervigilance, difficulty resting. We all know that we've experienced that. Always expecting something to go wrong. When's that shoe going to drop? Stress sensitivity, anxiety that feels way bigger than that current moment. All of these things, but you realize that you're you're not failing. You're like you're my sis. What I've when you change that lens, I personally have learned like, okay, I'm not failing here. My system is learning something. What is this information? What is this lesson that I'm supposed to be learning here? Or it not even. I guess it is a lesson, but you're learning something in order how to walk forward differently, right? It's a shift in awareness. I think and it's a very very different story. Believing than believing that you're broken. When you shift that lens, you realize that okay, I'm not broken. I've inherited some of these things, and now that I have certain tools, now I can move differently. What is your perspective on that powerful kind of reframe?
Well, first, I want to touch on something that you said earlier about the doing things differently, because we have to look at the fact that our generations before us, especially, I mean, I'm going to date myself here, but like the baby boomers, which was our parents' generation,
Mm-hmm.
they were taught, they were programmed to hush about things that happen behind closed doors, not to talk about their emotions, not to talk about the things. And with the advancements in research since then, we have access to so much more material now about what's going on. And when we were talking earlier about, when your kid gets diagnosed or a family member gets diagnosed, and you're like, man, this really makes sense. This puts a lot of pieces of myself together. It is
Mm-hmm.
because of that, newfound research and material that we have access to now that we didn't before. And especially as a woman, because which we'll get into in a later episode about being gaslit and misdiagnosed and all the things, we kind of get glossed over all the time. So now that we have the access to that material, to that research, to these diagnoses, if you want to call it that, um, we can see ourselves in these things so much easier and be like, okay, well, if it's most likely genetics as well as, all the other things, then there's a high probability that this probably makes sense for me too. Because I'm not I don't necessarily condone self-diagnosing, but at the same time, when the research is there and the probability is there that it's probably, similar for you, then this makes sense. But as far as the epigenetics go, I also want to say something. I want to say something. I'm going to interject here and be like, the timing of this episode is divine intervention because I was on a podcast earlier today, and I'm going through some stuff right now, some ancestral stuff. And the episode I was on was about the observer effect. And somehow ancestral stuff still came up. It keeps coming up all the time for me in like the last week. And so it's really interesting that we're doing this episode today. I just wanted to throw that out there.
Oh, I
Um,
feel you. I feel you because I'm working through a bunch of ancestral stuff myself, as you know, and
yeah,
I was like, what is the we both don't believe in coincidence. So, like what are the odds that this is, it's all divine timing.
absolutely. So, all right, so epigenetics. There is a lot of science that backs everything that you were just talking about. But I also want to include that our bodies are made of a large percent of our bodies are made of water. Water
Hmm.
holds memory. Let's keep that in mind. So when you're going through experiences, especially, these high stress, traumatic experiences that affect your nervous system, and like you said, the womb for your children, there's a large possibility, and I don't know what the percentages are because I don't know how much research has been done on this because it's a little woo, but it's still science. How much of these things are being stored in the water cells of our body because they hold memory, they hold, you know, all of these things. And like I bless my water every time I pour a glass, and I'm like, all right, let's fill this with the love vibration to
Yep.
be absorbed into all my cells. Well, that works the other way too. So when you're going through all these things, now your cells are being affected by not only the water that's holding these memories, but the water is in your womb, the water is in your DNA, it's in everything. So now it's being passed on to future generations, whether you intend for that to happen or not. So this is another reason why it's so important for us to take accountability and responsibility for managing our nervous system, for working through our trauma and our wounds. And we can get into the ancestral part of that, generational curse breaking all that in a moment. But one thing from the psychology aspect that I really love is cognitive behavioral therapy. I don't necessarily believe in talk therapy as a standalone practice for healing, but when you incorporate cognitive behavioral therapy into energy healing and all the things which I do, it really changes the stress related reactions that we have to things, and it goes down to that epigenetic level. It affects your biology. It affects, there was studies done for people who were in the military for PTSD. There was all of these things that take that kind of therapy and have traced it back down to that epigenetic layer. So there is science behind it, not just the woo stuff that we're talking about, but it really does come down to taking accountability and responsibility for either the hand that you were dealt through your genetics or your own situations that you've been through, your trauma, your healing, all the things, and working through that so that A, you don't pass it on, but B, you're breaking the cycle for yourself and you're not having to go through all of that, continuously and working through nobody likes being triggered. And as a PTSD victim, no, thank you. So
Yeah.
it is really helpful to understand that aspect of the biological part behind changing all those things for yourself.
Absolutely, which is a great way to lead into those that cycle breaking, or we hear phrases like generational healing or cycle breaker, chain breaker, all those kinds of things all the time. But in real life, there it usually looks a whole lot less more glamorous than what it than what people when they talk about it. It's not that glamorous at all. It kind of it looks like, going to therapy, learning boundaries, resting without guilt, apologizing when needed, stopping that emotional suppression, parenting differently, actually becoming aware and naming dysfunction honestly, getting assessed by a physician, if that's what you feel called to do. For me, I mean, I was diagnosed with ADHD when I was a kid, when I was 10, and epilepsy at 8. But now that I've entered perimenopause, I highly suspect I'm on the autism spectrum. And in fact, my gut like knows it. Like I've went down several rabbit holes and I'm like, okay, there's just too many similarities. There's this, and this, and this. But personally, I don't need that diagnosis to know how to move differently or how to work with my system versus, all these years working against it. I don't need that diagnosis for that. So, anyways, we can talk about that later. But if you're being called to get assessed, then doing things like that, or taking care of your body, choosing relationships that feel safe to you, letting yourself be supported instead of just saying you can do it all by yourself. That's what changing the lineage often looks like.
Mhm.
Small repeated acts that create a different future. And
Yeah.
yes, it is exhausting. I mean, I will be completely honest, it is downright exhausting. at times, but the exhilaration that you get and liberation that you feel is so worth it in the end, because you've got all these ancestors behind you clapping you on and saying thank you for being able to have the strength and courage to do that we didn't have. And not only that, but you're liberating the future generations so that they don't have to deal with everything that we had to deal with. So you're not just changing habits, you're changing the entire inheritance. What are your thoughts?
I love this. So I'm a generational curse breaker for my family line as well. And, I talk to so many women. I just had a client the other day that I was talking to. I did an Akashic Records reading for her, and a lot of her blocks and wounds about money were generational curses. And she was like, why? And she comes from a traditional Brahmin family, an Indian family. And she's like, why is this my responsibility? Why do I have to take on all of their stuff when I'm still trying to take on my own stuff and find a husband and have kids and all the things? And I was like, we have to remember that even though the ancestral and generational layer is there, it's not an excuse or a reason to blame your family line for your issues.
Absolutely.
You signed on for this before you got here. You chose this family for a reason. You wanted to be that generational curse breaker. If you weren't strong enough to be able to do it, then you never would have been in that position. So it's all about reframing how you think about it. And you hear about these curses and all the things, the bad parts about it, but you also have to look at the flip side of that too and look at the positive part. Like, look at how much resilience they had. Look at how much they actually survived and got through, because that comes through the DNA as well. It's not just the bad stuff,
Yep.
it's the good stuff
Yep.
from that as well. And so I've, been through so much crap in my life that were repeated behaviors that have happened on both sides of my family. And I'm grateful that even though I had to go through those experiences myself, I was able to put a stop to it. And now when you do, and people are like, oh, well, this is such a big responsibility to take on. But I got to tell you, like, it's actually really easy, because as you heal yourself and your own experiences, that healing ripples back in time automatically. Like you should do a ritual and acknowledge your ancestors and set the intention to send it back. But even if you don't, that energy of healing yourself ripples back in time and forward in time. So you're doing what they couldn't, and you're healing yourself
Absolutely.
and in turn healing them. And now you've broken that pattern, and all your future generations don't have to worry about having to repeat that cycle and go through those same experiences. So generational curse breaking is a big thing for me, um, personally and with my clients. And it's such an amazing experience to be like, wow, I'm the one that gets to change all of this stuff for
Yep.
everybody. And I'm the one who has the opportunity to have those materials, have the research, have, you know, a voice even to speak about it and to do something different. And so even though it seems like a big responsibility, it's actually a blessing if you look
It's
at it
both.
right.
Yeah,
Hmm.
it's really both. And while it may feel difficult, and it's a big responsibility, it's largely a blessing,
Hmm.
because you that little bit of time that it takes to break these cycles and these patterns. Think of the time and the amount of people that you're liberating, because it's not just the future generations that you're liberating the past ones as
And who
well. So
knows how far back that goes? I mean, honestly.
absolutely.
I mean, I've done
Which
my
and
family tree and genealogy, and I know a lot of the stuff that I know is through that, but like I've only taken the research back so far because of documentation and everything. So, and it goes back a long ways, but who knows how much farther back that goes, even from what I already know. You know what I mean?
I'm sorry. Um,
Hey, life
kids.
happens.
No. Um, so I found that as I've moved through this, there is some practical tools that you can use as well, and family pattern mapping is largely one of them.
Hmm.
You can, if you're a journaler, it would help. Like write down some patterns that you've noticed repeating through generations. And I can give you some examples. It could be anything like people pleasing, emotional shutdown, um, it, general chaos, over giving, overextension, uh, a lot of anxiety, addiction. That's one that I know that I came to this earth to break was addiction. It's a very huge pattern in my family. Um, Explosive anger, that was one too. I had to learn boundaries to say, hey, nope, not dealing with this. Now there's a way to phrase things and position but being the martyr in certain situations, these are all things that you can notice that happens in your past generations or in your family, and you can write these down, and then you can ask to what would the opposite look like in my daily life, like in a practical way, like what would look different if I chose to change this and do the opposite. um you know I find it, and at first it's hard because I feel like when you start to make a change, you usually go from like one extreme to the other, and you have to learn to kind of balance it over time. Because I know that when I did it, like we'll use boundaries as an example. When I first started, boundaries were never modeled for me. So when I first started laying boundaries, they were extremely sloppy. And so I had to learn to kind of balance it. And even more so, like I didn't really know the real um like way to deliver a boundary, because to me a boundary was always a threat. You do this or this is going to happen. And usually it was getting something taken away, right? Or, whether that be love, whether that be an electron, whatever the case may be, you were getting something taken away. And in fact, that's not what a boundary is at all. It's a self-protection. And by self-protection, I don't mean like putting up a guard or a wall or anything, but you're putting on a little bit of an armor of sorts so that their response or whatever you're laying the boundary for is not going to be triggering, or you're not going to be reactive within that situation, if that makes sense. Anyways, so boundaries were not modeled for me very well. And so mine were very sloppy. And when I first started delivering them, they were very, let's say, like, hey mom, like I can't talk about this right now because you're negative Nancy, and I'm here to talk about more positive things. So if you don't do this, then I'm just gonna go.
Well, that's
Now
different. It's transactional too.
while part of that is very true, there's a way that you can position it to sound with a little more compassion. When you lay a true healthy boundary, there's compassion in there. There's kindness in there. It doesn't sound like a threat. And so there's always going to be, and when you first learn things like this, I've noticed the pattern within myself. So I don't know if it moves like that for everyone else, but I know it does for me. Like there's usually I start at one extreme and move to the other. And finding that balance it takes a while. It doesn't happen overnight. But once you find that balance, boy, does it start moving a whole lot easier. And people look up and they're like, oh, okay. Like, I don't know that. And people even like the boundaries. People may step on those boundaries because they're not used to you responding in that way. They're used to the old you. So they're going to try them. They're going to push their limits to see how far they can get before you keep and hold that boundary firm, and that was the challenging part for me. Am I going to stay firm in my boundary, or am I just going to lay the boundary and not uphold it? That was another thing. So this is really I think a cool way and a very practical way to learn how to kind of move through these generational cycles, so that you can becoming aware of what is actually taking place in your lineage. What are your thoughts on that?
So I completely agree with you. And one thing I want to say is to hold compassion, just to speak on what you were just talking about, to hold compassion for yourself as you navigate through finding those healthy boundaries, because that was a big thing for me too. And it was, you have to go through both sides of the spectrum to appreciate what they both look like before you can find that balance in the middle. And people are so hard on themselves. They're like, man, I just went from one extreme to the next. I was like, yeah, well, that's part of the process because you can't truly find the balance between them if you don't know what both sides look like. That
Absolutely.
that being said, with the family pattern mapping, I would take it even one step further because yes, the people pleasing, these are all symptoms of, and I'm just speaking from personal experience here. These were all symptoms that came from an experience. So I had to take it one step further and actually go down to the root of why those symptoms were happening.
Hmm.
And because there was a lot of sexual abuse and trauma, both as a perpetrator and a victim in my family lines. There was alcoholism in there. There was, being suppressed as a woman in there. So the voice thing, like there was a lot of those and I did find a lot of this out by doing my family tree and genealogy and newspaper.com and all the things. And you don't even have to do that because I found that a lot of the experiences that I've been through in my life that were traumatic were generational, were ancestral. There was a reason why I went through
They
that.
were older than you. Yeah.
Yes, and I didn't even need to know, you don't even need to look into your family line. You can just probably safely assume that if it's something you went through that was that traumatic, most likely there is an ancestral aspect to that. So you don't even have to look back and just be like, okay, I went through this. Most likely someone else did too. So when you do that and you go through that healing process, you can just send the energy back, rippling in time, and just have confidence that you're doing something in that respect.
Well, I
Because
think that creates distance too. When you realize that it's bigger than or that it's older than you, when it didn't start with you, it creates enough distance to uh create choice of sorts. You know what I mean? Like if you know, like, hey, I know, like this feeling feels huge in the moment, right? It's bigger, it's ancient, whatever. I know that this is bigger than me because even if you experience it personally, the response, internal response that you're getting is far larger than if it did start with you. I feel like,
yeah,
because there's so many other emotional layers coming in, and when you realize that you can put that distance within your perspective and be like, okay, well, now I have a choice to do something about it. Now I
absolutely.
have a choice that I can do some, because when you don't have that distance and you don't create that safety, like, area, then you can't make those choices because you're still in that reactivity state of mind. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. But it also, and that also helps with the blame and the shame and the guilt that goes along with that too, because you're like, man, people, especially going through sexual trauma or narcissistic relationships or, something that like has that aspect to it. But once you realize that this is bigger than you and you had to go through this in order to help your ancestral line, well, then it was going to happen regardless. And you don't need to blame yourself. You don't need to have that guilt and shame that go along with being stuck in an experience like that because, yeah, you could have seen it ahead of time, but then you wouldn't have been able to do the generational curse breaking. Yeah, you
Yeah,
could
it's
have
it's
seen the
it's
red
it's,
flags,
it's
but
essential. It's
yeah,
essential to give yourself grace. It really
100%.
is, especially if you know you're a cycle breaker.
Hmm.
You have to give yourself grace because it's not just you that you're carrying. You're carrying so many other people
Hmm.
that couldn't do this alone, So you have to give yourself some compassion and kindness while you're moving through this, because hello, we're human. We don't know what the hell we're doing.
Right.
Like, we're doing this intuitively. We're doing this. Well, we may have some help if we seek, another practitioner's help or something like that, which a lot do. So I should say that. But, at first when I started doing it, I was doing it purely intuitively.
Hmm.
So I yes, I think you're, but there's still other ways that you can do. And we talk about this all the time, you and I. There's somatic practices that we can do to help move through this. You think about, we'll use my current thing. Like, I just recently connected with an ancestor that's been with me for a long time, and she's Native American. And the first thing that I think of when I think of my Native American lineage is, like this rain dance and this ritualistic dance, and being in full regalia. And so when you think of somatic practices, what are some of those tools that we tell people to use? You get up and you dance, you shake your body in ways that you don't every day,
Yep.
doing stretches, like, whether that be yoga or whatever, doing your breath work, things like that. Native Americans, they did all that breath work and those real deep, long exhales and all of that. These body-based therapies are huge when it comes to that. And your ancestors recognize those things,
Mhm.
and they will work with you through this. I know that sounds crazy to a lot of people, but it's true.
They are always
It is.
with you,
They
absolutely.
are always with you.
Just like your spirit team, your guides, your angels, your ancestors
Yes.
are right there with them. Yep.
Absolutely. But this movement can help you complete like stress cycles and wounds alone that you couldn't before, And so it helps they coexist, like not coexist. They can I just lost the word, but they work well in conjunction with all these other things that we're talking about. But and while you don't have to, it just makes things a little bit easier.
Mhm.
There are times where I'll go a day or so and I'll like, I didn't do any of my, I didn't do my dance party, or I didn't do this or that. And I was like, because life got in the way. Like, listen, we're human. It happens.
Mhm.
Again, giving yourself the grace to and being kind and compassionate with yourself. It happens. Things happen. But just becoming aware and catching yourself in that, get back on track. Start doing it again. So, are there any other tools besides those that you like, the somatic ones that you think that are worth mentioning for this particular?
Yeah. So the somatic things are a huge thing, especially if you go back to what we were talking about in the beginning of the episode about the nervous system and the epigenetics
Mhm.
and working through that. Those are absolutely 100% important. And there's so many different ways that you can do that. But the other thing that I touched on briefly earlier that I want to bring up again is acknowledging your ancestors and doing little
Oh,
rituals.
yes, good one.
I'm a witchy girl, so I'm all about my rituals and stuff. Lighting a candle and just, you don't even have to know their names, but just acknowledge your ancestors and be like, I hear you, I see you, I'm here for you, I know you're here for me. Let's work through this together because they are always with you and you do have their support, regardless of whether you feel it or see it or know it, it's there. And especially as a generational curse breaker, like they're like here, like, yes, she's finally doing
Yep.
all the things that we couldn't do.
Yep.
Like, it's finally time. We've been waiting for eons and eons. Like, yes, it's time. So they are there. So just acknowledging, and I'm a big believer in always asking for permission and always expressing gratitude, no matter what you're doing. I don't care if you're talking to a tree. I don't care if you're making dinner, whatever it is. Those are extremely important. So just by acknowledging them and being like, I hear you, I see you, it's just like working with clients. I hear you, I see you, you matter. Telling them and giving them that grace is so important and will really help open the channel to connecting with them and to allow that energy, like I said, as you heal yourself to ripple through because you've made that connection. So that's just another thing that I really wanted to kind of bring up again because that's important for me.
All right. So I think that you mentioned the ancestors are always there for support. And I think that that's an important thing to acknowledge, not only acknowledging them, but asking them for support. You can ask for support in your daily life, and you should get good at that, mind you. But just knowing that they're there, they are there to help support you as well is really key in helping break these cycles because they've moved through this before, whereas you haven't, or you are moving through it in real time. So knowing that you can ask for their support is huge. So let me just, I feel this is important to say your lineage is not, it's not only dysfunction, it's resilience. And I know you mentioned that before. Some have adapted enough for you to, someone has adapted enough for you to be here. Someone has survived enough for you to exist. Someone's carried strength, intuition, intelligence, sensitivity, creativity, grit. That same sensitivity that creates difficulty now may once have been protective. So the work is not rejecting where you came from, it's learning to keep the gifts and releasing the suffering.
Mhm.
Both can coexist. So keeping that in mind, again, that is keeping the grace, giving yourself grace, the kindness and the compassion. You don't need to place the blame. You can accept what is and just release the suffering part because the blessings that came from it, you wouldn't be who you are without all of that.
Mhm.
So if tonight has stirred anything in you, maybe ask yourself, what pattern am I ready to stop normalizing? And what healthier pattern am I ready to begin? Maybe because it runs in the family, but healing can run there too, and sometimes the first woman who pauses, who names it, and who chooses differently changes more than she realizes. Heather, I'd really like to open this up for any final thoughts or anything that's coming through as we close tonight.
I mean, just my own experience as being a general curse breaker and generational curse breaker and going through the healing journey that I've been through because it has been a lot. It's been overwhelming at times. It's been
Mm-hmm.
um, a lot of trauma that I've had to work through. But I can tell you that coming out the other side of that has made it's completely changed my whole life and how I perceive the world, how I interact with the world, how I think about people, how I have integrated understanding, compassion, and forgiveness into my life. And just using that reframe that you just touched on about looking at the positive part about it too.
Yep,
And so integrating all of that into who I've become has been rewarding, not just knowing that I've broken these curses and these chains, as you call them, for my family lines, but also just that freedom, liberation, and empowerment that I feel in my own life as well has been completely rewarding and just beyond words. It's been very liberating and I can't recommend it enough, honestly. But you have to
absolutely.
work through it. You have to wait till you're ready to work through it. But luckily you have resources like Courtney and I who can help you do that and many others out there as well. So um if you have questions, you have those hard things like I was talking about for me with, the abuse and the trauma, it's it's okay. It's okay. And it's not yours alone to carry, so you don't have to carry it alone.
Absolutely.
And you don't have to relive those experiences as you go through the healing journey either. And that's what I want people to know, and something that I've been talking about a lot lately.
You can observe those and not have to relive them. Absolutely. And that's a
Yeah.
big thing because it's why it keeps a lot of people from moving forward in their healing journey. Because they think that they're going to have to relive that pain. And while it may be a little painful, if you choose to sit back and observe what you went through versus you do this a lot in your inner child healing, in
Mhm.
fact, that if you choose to be the observer rather than getting into that state once again, it's a completely different feeling.
Yeah.
It's one that's more, go ahead.
And you're observing it from your current state of where you're at, not as the person who was experiencing it. You're watching it like a movie. That's and
Right.
that's that's only one way to go through it as well, because like I said earlier, there's a lot of repeated patterns. So you don't have to relive every experience. We get to the root cause of it. And sometimes you don't even have to observe. Sometimes we just work through it at an emotional level, or we work through it as a mental perspective level. So that's just one, the what we did with your inner child healing, that's just one method. But you don't have to relive that. And again, I think people have such a fear of having to go through that experience again, and that's not 100% necessary. So yeah, that's why.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we could talk about this for hours.
We could. Absolutely.
But yes, and just knowing that like you said, that there is a lot, you don't have to go through this alone. There is ample amount of support out there. You, myself, other practitioners, and always remember your ancestors as well are here to support you in anything that you do. So you do not have to carry all of this alone. You know, it can be heavy, it can be extremely heavy at times and overwhelming. And but just knowing that your resilience alone is your strength, and it is something that you've inherited from those people from in your past, you know, so you have the strength to carry this through, but it can be exhausting and heavy. So just give yourself some grace, give yourself some kindness and compassion, and you will make it through, I promise. We're living human beings here speaking about it. So so we will I think that's all we got for today. So we will see everyone next week. Next week is the gut brain axis, sorry. And Dr. Scott will be back with us. So if you are wanting to know more about how your body and your gut is connected, well, it's all connected, but what's going on a deeper level, join us next time and we'll see you then.
Yep, have a
Thanks.
good one.
See ya.